Welcome to another edition of MPW Digital Extra, presented by Rustic Revivals Furniture Company. I'm Neal McCready. Today on the show, we get you ready for another weekend of college football and the NFL with a quartet of guests. First, we'll go to Tennessee to visit with Outkick's Trey Wallace. We'll get his thoughts on Ole Miss, his reflection from last Saturday's showdown in Tuscaloosa between Alabama and Georgia, and we'll look ahead to the weekend. Then Michael Katz of the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal joins to look ahead to number 12, Ole Miss's critical game Saturday at South Carolina. We'll get the South Carolina side of things with Chris Clark of GamecockCentral.com. And finally, Ben Mintz of Barstool. He'll join for his weekly preview of college football and the NFL. MPW Digital Extra is brought to you by Rustic Revivals. Based out of Flowood, Mississippi, Rustic Revivals builds tables and other furniture by hand with locally sourced lumber. The husband and wife team of Josh and Ashley Pierce specialize in custom-ordered tables, beds, dressers, coffee tables, bookshelves, decorative cabinets, and chairs. They also have a limited selection of ready-for-pickup pieces available in their shop. Rustic Revivals delivers within 250 miles of Flowood. All pieces are sealed for protection. Podcast listeners can take 10% off their purchase by using the code REBELS10. That's REBELS10. The QR code is right here on the YouTube stream. Go to rusticrevivalsms.com, facebook.com/rusticrevivalsms, or Rustic Revivals on Instagram. You can also order directly by calling 228-217-1243 or email rusticrevivals@gmail.com. I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. Clark Ford's in Amory, Mississippi. 662-257-1900 is that number. Call it. Ask for Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He will send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours, right to the bottom line. No hassle, no haggle. You get your quote. The rest is up to you. You can shop that quote around. You can do what I've done, what I recommend that you do, and that's hop into a Clark Ford today. 662-257-1900. All guests join the show on the Campbell Clinic hotline. From fractures and sports injuries to complex spine and limb conditions, the pediatric orthopedic physicians at Campbell Clinic in Oxford are the only specialized pediatric orthopedic team in North Mississippi providing expert care for growing bodies. So visit campbellclinicoxford.com to schedule an appointment or call 901-759-3111. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love, turn them up to 11, choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, try spicy ghost pepper, only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's. And this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something that scares you? Share a fear no matter how big or small. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us, but what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding things back. I've benefited from therapy, helping to put me through giving me some perspective to get through adversity, get the tools to work through some difficult times. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist anytime for no additional charge. So overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/MPW today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MPW. Now let's go to the Campbell Clinic hotline. Get started with this edition of MPW Digital Extra presented by Rustic Revivals. First up, it's my good friend Trey Wallace of Outkick. Enjoy. Trey Wallace, I've known Trey for a long time with Outkick now, done a great job. I'm super proud of his career, happy for him where he's gotten. He was at Alabama, Georgia last week. We'll talk about that game, what it means and that stuff in a minute, but I want to talk about Ole Miss first because Trey was sitting in his car outside somewhere on the Alabama campus, watching the end of Ole Miss and Kentucky. Of course, Kentucky, Trey, as you know, beats Ole Miss 20-17. It has sent shockwaves really through Oxford over the last few days. What were your thoughts as that game unfolded?
I couldn't believe I was actually getting signal sitting in the West Tenor parking lot right off University Drive in Tuscaloosa. But yeah, I mean, I sat there and watched the whole second half, and Kentucky kept hanging in, and I was like, okay, like Ole Miss is not putting the dagger into Kentucky. And I was like, all right, let them. You let Mark Stoops hang around long enough, he's going to get you somehow. And that could have been the case, against Georgia, 3 weeks ago. But I just felt that Kentucky's defense had gotten Ole Miss out of whack when it comes to downfield passing. And I was like, okay, that means Ole Miss could have to run. And so when you look at the whole situation, I said this the other day to somebody, Mark Stoops grabbed his cojones and decided, okay, screw the narrative around me, man. Like, I'm going for it. If I give the ball back to Ole Miss, they're going to one first down, this game's over with. So he took it out of Ole Miss's hands. And a lot of people point to that play as like the big one. In my opinion, one of the other biggest plays is throwing your backup quarterback in on the 3-yard line and letting him be the one to get you in the end zone. And I was like, okay, all right, that's another big one. So I just, from an Ole Miss standpoint, I think that there is there's a lot of nervousness surrounding the program right now because of what's ahead. Because you dropped that game to Kentucky, okay, now you got to go to Columbia, South Carolina, and if Lenore Sellers is ready to go, and he can be a problem for the defense and get outside the pocket, like South Carolina can beat you. Like South Carolina they should have beaten LSU, and I know shoulda, woulda, coulda, but they should have beaten LSU. And this is the other thing too, Neal, is like the pressure is on Ole Miss now, brother. Like this, you thought the pressure was on you before the season to make the playoffs. This is it, because if you drop another game, and I wrote about this on Monday. I said, you play in South Carolina and you're playing LSU. You have to go 2-0 if you're going to be in playoff contention by the first week of November. You have to. There's no way around it, because that Georgia game's looming. Oklahoma is not going to be some cakewalk, with Michael Hawkins Jr. There are other opportunities. And I think what this past weekend presented is there's upsets all around the conference. Like, I imagine we are going to see one this weekend. We're going to see one the next couple of weeks. Like, this is not anything that there's a lot of good teams in this conference that are good enough to get you if you are not playing at your very best. And we saw that with Kentucky and Ole Miss. Arkansas, in my opinion, probably should have beaten Texas A&M this past weekend. There were opportunities for that game to go in different directions. So what I'm getting at here is, like, this is it for Ole Miss. Like, you better go to Columbia and win, because that night game in Death Valley, that's a pressure-packed situation for so many different reasons.
Oh, this is a must-win for Ole Miss. This is the biggest week of the Kiffin era, and if he wins it, next week becomes the biggest week of the Kiffin era. You're exactly right. When you lose at home to Kentucky, is it the end of the world? No, but you can see it from here, because because had you beaten Kentucky and you win one of the two games on the road, especially if, like, say you beat South Carolina, you lose to LSU. Everybody goes, okay, well, people go to LSU and lose all the time. And then you come back and maybe you beat Oklahoma, you lose at home to Georgia, but then you went out 10-2. You're somewhere in the 7, 8, 9 seed in the playoff. Everything's fine, right?
Yeah.
But now you've lost to Kentucky. And so that's a loss that isn't as palatable to the committee as a hypothetical loss in Baton Rouge to LSU. So you put yourself in this weird spot where now you have to go win in Columbia, you have to go win at LSU, and then maybe you could still survive a loss to Georgia if everything goes right with Georgia. And slip in, assuming that Kentucky has a good year. But if Kentucky has a 5-7 season, that home loss to them is going to really put you in a weird spot. So, yeah, the damn season's on the brink this week. I wrote that on Saturday afternoon. We've been talking about the Last Dance, the whole Michael Jordan thing. I think it's time to talk about the Bobby Knight basketball story, season on the brink, because here's where we are.
Well, it's you don't have a sexy loss, and I'll phrase it kind of towards like Michigan. Michigan, okay, they are what they are, but they're still hanging around. They're still winning games. Let's see what happens the rest of the Big Ten season. I'm not saying they're going to go to the playoffs, but I am saying is that they've got the sexy loss to Texas, which, okay, that's cool. Texas is probably going to be either 1-5 at the end of the season, or 6, whatever. And the committee can go back and look, okay, well, they got beat up by a Texas squad that, pretty much, okay, if they beat Georgia at home, blah, blah, blah. You know where I'm going with this. Ole Miss has a bad loss. They don't have a sexy loss. You got a bad loss. If Kentucky comes out and loses 3 more games this season, and you're sitting at 4 losses on the year, the committee's going to go back and look at that. If you're sitting at 10-2, they're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. Like, we have to hold that game at home against them. We can't just let that pass. And I think that's when it's going to be very intriguing to me once you get to that 3rd week of November or whatnot, and the playoffs are coming to an end, and not the playoffs, the season, and then we're figuring out what the SEC title game is going to look like. I'm just saying, I think we're both on the mark here, where Shane Beamer would love nothing more than to spoil everything for Ole Miss this weekend.
Sure.
And when I say everything, it's the season. Like, you will not survive. You go to South Carolina and lose, your season's done, pretty much. You're not making the playoffs, period. If you go to Baton Rouge next week, and let's just say you get beat by 14 points. Let's just throw that out there.
Okay.
Your season's done then. Because Neal, if you're sitting at 2 losses before we get to the 3rd week of October, you're telling me the performance that we saw against Kentucky, then potentially what we see in these next 2, they're going to drop another game. Like, they're not going to run the table with what we saw this past weekend. So that's where it gets to a point, where it's like, okay, like, this did not go as well as we thought. And that's the biggest thing I look at with Ole Miss is, if they'd have won that game, it's like you said, if they'd have beat Kentucky, Neal, they could have afforded a loss to LSU. They could have afforded to get beat by Georgia. And then you take care of the rest of the business with Arkansas, Oklahoma, whatnot, a couple others, and then you're going to go to the playoffs. But now, Ole Miss fans should be kind of in a what the hell just happened mode, because Lane Kiffin and them, here's how I told somebody this the other day. Lane Kiffin them pretty much like promised like a playoff spot this year in a way. When I'm talking about the roster, when they went out and bought the roster, and they went out and put all this together and put all the stars together and all the preseason shit, and I get Lane was trying to calm that down a little bit, and I understand that part, but at the same time, when you go out and do what you do in the portal and signing these players, to me, you're making a one-run season. Meaning this is it. We're loading the box here. We are going to go for the title this year. And they can try next year. They can try to do the same damn thing again. But I just look at it as they were sitting at the poker table, Neal, and they went all in this year. And I'm interested to see what a buy-in would be like after the year.
Yeah, it's why I think these next 2 games so fascinating, because if you lose one of them, especially if you lose this one Saturday, let's start with that one. If you lose in Columbia, where realistically it's just done. You're halfway through the season, but the season's kind of done. What does that look like inside the building in terms of buy-in? What does that look like for alums, boosters, the people that are giving to collectives? Do they start questioning their investment? And then what does it mean for all the outside noise with Kiffin? Because for the longest time it was this, and I was part of it, and I believe it. If Ole Miss is in the playoff, other college teams can't wait on Lane Kiffin. You just can't.
Correct.
But if Ole Miss isn't in the playoff, well, now you weigh the Kiffin stuff, and whether you decide to hire him or not, whether he decides to go or not, I have no idea, okay? But that noise kicks in. really loud if you lose on Saturday in Columbia. That storyline, the veracity of which I can't attest to, but that storyline begins to really pick up, and it becomes this cacophony of noise around your program at a time when you've got this team that was last dance, championship or bust, and suddenly the bust part is there in front of you, and it gets really, really weird fast. And that's the part of this new college football that I've tried to tell people, hey, this is all super exciting as long as you win. But when you don't win as big as you thought you'd win, you get to the place where, yeah, the ceiling's super high, but the floor is like this Raiders of the Lost Ark thing where you just fall forever into a pit of snakes, right? It's kind of like that.
Yes.
And that's there's less middle ground in this new world.
Here's how I look at it. If Ole Miss drops one of the next two and they're out of contention, pretty much, and I get 2 losses, okay, there's still that miracle way to get in by winning out.
Sure.
I understand that's still out there. Okay, I get it. I'll throw one at you, though. Let's say Florida barely beats UCF this weekend, and UCF looked like dog shit against Colorado. Okay, but let's just say they come out and Gus Malzahn and KJ Jefferson do something, and I'm getting to a point here. But then Florida goes to Knoxville, and they get their brains beat in because Tennessee's defense is actually good for the first time in a very long time, and they've got an offense that can score. So Florida's sitting in that spot now where they're like, okay, all right, like, yeah, we're going to move on. Like, the money's there. And if Ole Miss drops one of these 2 games, I promise you stories will start coming out of Gainesville that Lane Kiffin is interested in the Florida job. Because now you're at the point. If Florida wants to go with Kiffin, and this is hypothetical, but if Florida wants to go with Kiffin and they see that Ole Miss has already dropped another game, they're going to muddy the waters. Like it or not, it's going to happen. And that's going to come from, I don't know who the hell who. Boosters, whatever. But they're going to be called sources, okay? And they're going to be put out there that, yeah, we're going to make a run, and Kiffin once this thing's done because everybody can see the writing on the wall with Billy Napier. And as much as I love Billy, you can see where that's kind of trending now. So I'm just saying, like, I'm not trying to freak Ole Miss fans out here, but when I am saying the reality of what we do for a living, there will be folks that try to chum this thing up if Ole Miss drops another game and pretty much they're sitting at 19th in the country and they got to go undefeated the rest of the year to make the playoffs. I got a weird feeling about that, Neal.
So what does Ole Miss have to do to win these next 2 games?
Yeah, you got to figure out how you're going to have stability along your offensive line, and Jackson Dart. To me in that second half, it just felt like they weren't testing Kentucky as much deep as they should have. And I get the Kentucky front 7 is pretty damn good, but Ole Miss's offensive line, you got to have better help when it comes to protection from your running backs, and I think the play calling, needs to be more spread out. And I just. If Lenore Sellers is able to go on Saturday, South Carolina's quarterback, he's going to present a lot of problems because of his legs. And he can throw a pretty ball too. But there will be ways that Shane Beamer tries to dial this up with his coordinators to try to put as much pressure on Jackson Dart into making bad decisions. And then on offense, they're going to try to attack that secondary, of Ole Miss. And I think that, in my opinion, is where Ole Miss could get beat. Now, Ole Miss could also come out and rush for 120 yards, set something up on the offensive line, give Jackson Dart some time in the pocket, let the play action work, and they come out and you beat a South Carolina defense that is middle of the pack in the conference, But there's an opportunity for Ole Miss to kind of turn this thing around, and Jackson Dart and Trey Harris to kind of get really on the same page fully, during the game. And I get it. Teams are gonna try to double team. Trey Harris. I understand that, but you got to find your other weapons on the outside, and that's where I think Ole Miss can take advantage of South Carolina. That's where I think Ole Miss can take advantage of the middle of the field against LSU. Who's without Harold Perkins Jr. now again. There are opportunities for them to win, and there's a perfect game plan for them to win. But at the same time, you got to execute it, and you can't be stagnant. It just felt like they fell into the moment on Saturday against Kentucky, and they couldn't figure out a way just to hit them downfield and kill the threat. And look, we all saw it in the LSU game versus South Carolina. If people were paying attention and watching, South Carolina should have beaten LSU. They let that game kind of wind down. LSU took advantage. Okay, congratulations. But you saw how good of a South Carolina team it could be against an opponent like the Tigers. So that's why I think this game could go in two different directions. Like I do feel Ole Miss should go in there and win that football game, and I do think that they should win by probably 10 points or a little bit more. But at the same time, I said that going into the Kentucky game, and so now you're going into a rabid environment in Columbia, which they haven't lost faith in Shane Beamer. Sure, he lost LSU, but then they sold out the game versus, I think it was Akron.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, you're walking into a hornet's nest and you're wounded, by the way. You want to act like you're not wounded, but you're wounded. And all the pressure is on you. 2 fumbles, an interception thrown in there. You get caught in quicksand, Neal. And once you get caught in that quicksand, man, it's very, very hard to pry your way out of it. And I just think kind of that's what Ole Miss is walking into, and they have to prevent it in any way that they can.
What was your takeaway from Tuscaloosa on Saturday night?
Pure absolute chaos. And with presidential candidates, please stop freaking showing up to football games. Like that's the shit that pisses me off more than anything.
What was that like? What was that like on Saturday?
I mean, it was such a cluster. Like, it was such a cluster getting in, and look, I'm not going to complain about going and covering a game and being there and getting to enjoy that. But at the same time, I do have the right to be like, okay, this is a real pain in the ass, that he showed up. Like, it was electric. The atmosphere, like before the game, a lot of Georgia fans in. They did not sell their allotment out, which was surprising to me. I look at some weird things, Neal, when I go to games. I'm like, all right, where's the visitor section? And they put the students up in the Georgia section where they didn't sell their tickets. I was kind of surprised by that. But overall, Trump didn't show up until, second quarter. I walked outside because Clay Travis, a guy that works for Outkick, was going to have an interview with Donald Trump. But I walked outside and I was like, all right, is this guy here yet? Like, okay, can we get back to work? You know what I mean? In a sense of, what's the lines look outside? And I thought it was a very cool environment. The whole president thing, who cares? I mean, whatever. It's fine. I know why they showed up. It's cool. God bless Kid Rock. If you're a fan of him, whatever.
Did you see those guys? How close did you get to the president?
Well, the president was different. You had to be on a freaking list, and you had to have everything but a rectal examination to get near him. But at the same time, Kid Rock had like gone on the field for something, like they were playing one of his songs, and I was walking from one end zone to the other, but I need to go through the concourse because it was so crowded on the sideline. I did photography for the game this past weekend. So I was shooting the game. So I was trying to get from one end zone to the other. And so I had to take the concourse. Well, all of a sudden, Kid Rock comes walking out of this area. I'm like, all right, that's interesting. Let me just take my phone out. I'll take a picture, whatever. I don't really care for the guy much. His songs, not whatever. But then the pretzel workers started asking him, hey, would you buy a pretzel? Would you buy a pretzel? Yelling at him. Kid Rock comes out, dude. He takes this wad of cash, and I posted this on social media. He takes this wad of cash out of his pants that I was just jealous right when I saw it. It had to be $5,000. And he's just sitting there counting off $100 bills, and gives the pretzel workers $500. I was like, well, that shit just happened. I got it on video. And then I had people on social media, that was a video opportunity for Kid Rock to look civil. I was like, no, dude, I pulled out my freaking camera. Nobody was looking, and I just filmed it, whatever. So, but like, I think getting to like the whole game, I'll tell you this, and this in our business, like I already had a skeleton article written at halftime. I was like, my title was something along the lines of Alabama curb stomps Georgia, something like that. And then,
What it looked
you
like
know,
for a half, for sure.
right. It looked like it for a half. And then, but that's what you have to do in our business because everything's on a timeline. But then I go back out there and look, I give credit so much to Georgia for fighting back in that game when they could have laid down. I mean, honestly, they could have. And then also the competitiveness of Carson Beck. I know he threw that last interception, but at one point, Neal, he was 3 for 6 in the second half, and 2 of those were touchdowns. I'm like, oh shit, okay, like like he's come out. Like they figured it out on defense in the second half. What they should have figured out at the beginning of the second quarter, which was guard the edges. Don't let Jalen Milroe go crazy on you with his legs. I think overall, both teams come out of this better than they entered. I think Georgia understands we've got a really good, solid football team that we got caught in a tornado in the first quarter and we didn't make the changes that we should have. And Alabama just kept bringing it. So at the same time, it's like, okay, Alabama knows how good they are. I think, in my opinion, okay, we can beat these teams. We can hang in there with these teams. We're good enough, our defense. But at the same time, Georgia comes out in the second half and like, hey, look, we're not going anywhere. Like, okay, I get it. And when I watched Kirby Smart, and this was something that was telling to me post game, Neal, I was sitting there near the little small tunnel in Bryant-Denny where the opposing players have to go into to go to their locker room. And Kirby Smart was just standing there right at the pylon. And he was slapping his Georgia players on the head when they were coming by. Some of the players had towels over their head, trying to. He ripped the towels off their head. He was talking to them. Kirby Smart knew how big that second half was for Georgia for the rest of this season.
He said it in the locker room. He told him in the locker room he'd never been more proud of a team for the way they fought, and that now it's a matter of, hey, taking this forward. It's why if I'm Auburn this weekend, I'm terrified of what I'm about to get with Georgia.
Oh, I'm scared shitless.
Because I'm about to get my brains kicked in. Because I think Georgia's about to go on a roll. I really do. I think the second half in Tuscaloosa for Georgia said so much about. We always talk about these words, and then when we see it, we don't want to talk about it. It told you everything about chemistry, culture, program, everything about them got revealed in the second half of that game because it would have been so easy to go, you know what, man, Alabama was on fire. We just got whipped. Nope. They came back and damn near won the game. Alabama, to their credit, made one more play. But Kirby said that. He goes, we talked about in the second half, we had to make more plays than them. He's like, we were one play away, one play short. Remember how this feels and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, here they come, man. They just discovered that all the work they do for culture and chemistry just paid off, and that it takes time to build that, and they've built it. I think they're going to be a bitch the rest of the way.
Brother, that matchup in 2.5 weeks in Austin, Texas, sign me up.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is a game, it'll be bigger than the one that I was just at this past weekend. When they go to Austin, Texas, and have to play in 2 weeks, yeah.
October 9th.
That's the same day Tennessee plays Alabama. So, like, if you're a college football fan, just get set for, like, a monster 3:30 and 7:30, like, day. It's going to be nuts. But at the same time, I just look at Georgia, and I was like, okay, like, this team is, like, they had a rough first, 25 minutes of the game. And then they settled in before halftime, whatever. And once they came out of that second half tunnel and I was on the sideline, I went to the Georgia area. I just wanted to see what the team was acting like, and I was shooting photos of them and whatnot. And dude, they were all dapping up and high-fiving and hitting each other in the pads. And so whatever the hell Kirby Smart said at halftime, those boys came out ready to freaking destroy Alabama and not be run out of Bryant-Denny Stadium embarrassed. I think that, yeah, sure, they can come back and win the game, but at the same time, we are not going to be embarrassed by Alabama. We are going to get back in the game. And so that just proved to me, Hugh Freeze, Auburn, your ass is had on Saturday. Like, you're done. Like, this team is going to come out and swarm you however they can. And then it just sets up, man, where I don't know what that game in Texas and how it's going to go, and I'm not going to try to predict it right now, but this is setting up for that run where Georgia is going to be just fine in the second half of the season. And, the crazy part is we could have two great games, with Georgia. That Ole Miss game could be great if
Yeah.
Ole Miss turns it around.
For sure.
Right.
If Ole Miss turns it around, right, beats South Carolina, beats LSU, you get an open date to decompress, to go, and you can sort of talk yourself into, okay, we traded LSU for Kentucky.
Yes.
Not a great trade, but it's okay. And then
Yes.
you beat Oklahoma and go to Arkansas and just make sure you win by 1 point and then come back. And there it is. I mean, here's your Super Bowl, right? I mean, there's a lot of ifs there. But yeah. But what you saw with Georgia and Tuscaloosa, if you're Texas, if you're Ole Miss, if you're the people, Tennessee, if you're the people that still have Georgia on your schedule, don't buy any of they're down bullshit. No. They're legit. No, you got your hands full. You better bring a lunch and you better come ready to go with a whole game, because they're not going to roll over.
Well, that's why I think it was so badass, from just the outcome of both sides of that. Like, Kalen DeBoer gets that great win. I thought he coached a good game. I think, whatever. Second half is what it is. I understand what they tried to do, in my opinion. They tried to do the same thing Tennessee did the previous week in Norman, where they were up by 20 points. They're like, okay, our defense is good enough. We've shown it. Let's try to win this game out. Not make mistakes that would kill us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Alabama comes away feeling good. They, just absolute monster with Ryan Williams, and Jalen Milroe, in my opinion, took another step in the right direction with his career trajectory. I don't care, post-college career. And at the same time, Kalen gets his win, and I think Alabama is going to be a very, very tough out. But at the same time, there's ways that Georgia showed ways to beat them. You stack your edges, you don't let Jalen, and you make them try to beat you deep. And that's where you have to have a good secondary. So I just came out of the game, Neal, like I said, man, positives for both sides of it. And then when you look at a college football environment in general, brother, that's it. Like that was it. Like, that's what I expect in the Southeastern Conference. And I was at Michigan, Ohio State at the end of last year, Thanksgiving weekend, you name it. I've been to Colorado, I've been to USC. That environment Saturday night felt like the LSU Alabama environment that we both covered years ago. Just so I think overall that both programs, right direction. Good luck to Auburn. Good luck to Vanderbilt this weekend, because both of them are going to take massive losses.
Can Missouri go to Texas A&M and win?
Man, I've been thinking about that since that Sunday morning. I had been. Yes, they can. You better figure out a way to stop Marcel Reed. And I'm talking about Missouri's linebacking core. I think what Marcel Reed brings to that football team, and I've followed that kid since high school.
Yeah.
Because he played in the mid-state of Tennessee. I think he is special. I think that you don't mess with what you have right now. If you're Mike Elko, I don't care if Connor Weigman's ready to go. Don't mess with it. You got Marcel Reed. The kid's playing really well. Your offense is different with him. I think the biggest thing for me, and I'm going to pick Missouri in this game to win, it's that, and it's easy to say Brady Cook and Luther Burden, but I do think it's Brady Cook and Luther Burden. I think it's Brady Cook and his ability to also get outside the pocket, make plays down the field. And I think Eli Drinkwitz and them have kind of set them up for this. I made a reference. I was talking to a buddy on Sunday afternoon, and I made a reference. It's like, okay, well, who has Missouri played that's going to remind you of Marcel Reed? I said, Castellanes from Boston College. Like, it was the same type of quarterback, the same type of offense that you're going to see out of A&M. So, like, they've seen this before. They know what to expect. They know that Marcel's going to be able to get outside the pocket or make plays with his legs and kind of open the field up a little bit. I do think Missouri can go in there and win. And I think people have been giving Missouri shit because of their schedule. And it's kind of like that, who have you played nonsense. It's kind of the same thing Ole Miss was going through, to be honest with you. Like, okay, you beat the hell out of teams, but who'd you really beat? I think this sets up as an opportunity for Missouri to come out and just stick the middle finger up and just beat Texas A&M on Saturday. And I think it being 11, I know people don't get into times and whatnot, but 11 o'clock kick, local, like, I think that's better for Missouri than it is for A&M. And I think this is an opportunity where Arkansas showed you ways to win with Taylor Green. Arkansas just didn't take advantage of certain situations they ran against A&M. I think with Brady Cook, I think there's that opportunity. Okay, like I can beat you with my legs if I need to on third down. I also have this dynamic receiver that's going to torch your secondary if he gets behind you. So, and then it also opens up other options too for him. So I do think Brady Cook and them go into Texas A&M and win. I expect a fun game. I expect a back and forth type of game. But at the end of the day, I know how much Eli Drinkwitz wants this one, and this could like catapult them in a way where you get past this one, you can afford a loss. You can afford maybe 2 losses against good teams and maybe still get in, but you got to win Saturday.
Yeah, I agree completely. Because if they go to Tuscaloosa and lose, that's their only loss. They're fine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Why is the Arkansas-Tennessee line as low as it is? I mean, I think I'd lay 23.5. It's 13.5. Why?
I think it's Tennessee's offensive line. I think if they don't get Lance Hart back this weekend, if John Campbell, I know John Campbell on the offensive line, Tennessee was out Norman in that second half playing with third string tackles. So they weren't going to pass the ball around because Nico was not going to sit in the pocket and get destroyed by Danny Stutzman. I mean, it was just simple as that. I think the line is where it's at because of the fact that no Tennessee can run the football and they have so many weapons at wide receiver, but at the same time, do you have the protection good enough to go 4 quarters? And I'm not saying Tennessee's losing. Tennessee's going to win on Saturday. But I'm saying that line and where it's at, they're good enough to beat you by 20, but we've also seen at times, and what I saw in Norman was a team that can grind you out on defense, keep it 14 points, something like that, and be okay. I think Taylor Green, in my honest opinion, I think that him getting outside the pocket and him being able to make some plays, I think that kind of makes Vegas a little bit nervous. But my biggest thing too is like you get it at 13 points. Have you not been paying attention to Tennessee defense? Like Tennessee defense is stout. Like this is the first time in a long time Tennessee can hang their hat on their defense and say, go win the football game. And I think also the fact that Tennessee probably has one of the deepest wide receiver cores in the conference. I mean, you got 5 guys that go out there and be starters if they need to. I don't know why the line is where it is. I was a little surprised because, like you said, I would have thought this was, and this is no disrespect to Vanderbilt in any way possible, but I kind of thought we'd get like an Alabama Vanderbilt type of line in this one, like 23.5, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sitting at 13.5, 14, kind of surprising to me, but I mean, I expect Tennessee to win. Let's just see, let's see what Josh decides to do. Heupel when it comes to offensive play calling in the second half. A
lot of people talk about the Florida job. That Arkansas job, I think, is coming open at the end of the season. What do you hear on it, if anything?
Sexy job, like has a chance to. They have a chance to be. They've got enough funding that they're going to be okay. I've been reading, I don't know the companies, but all this casino shit that's going on, they're trying to do raffles, and I've seen all that stuff. Arkansas has the money when it comes to NIL if they need it. Like if they really need it. Like if they want to pull an Ole Miss or Ohio State, and I'm not saying, $18 million, but I'm saying they got enough money to be able to put some pieces together. And I think Arkansas would be a tremendous job because of the way the conference stacks up now. Like we're not talking about the East and West divisions anymore. It's just all just go. Arkansas to me is not in the, I don't want to talk about facilities, but Arkansas to me, you can compare them to Florida. Because we're not talking about divisions anymore. We're just talking about programs overall. I think there's so much support in Arkansas. And I think once you saw Hunter Yurachek go out and say, all right, screw it, we're going to go get Calipari. I know how things are going at Kentucky. But he did go out there and make a splash with Calipari. I think he's ready to make a splash higher again. And I think he's ready to prove to Arkansas fans, okay, you thought basketball was good? Let me go find somebody for football. I'm not saying that some top guy is going to go take the Arkansas job. But I am saying is that I think that program is one good coach away from being a problem for teams every single year. And I'm not, I'm not talking about Georgia and all that type of shit.
Yeah,
I'm just talking about.
I know what you're saying. What you're basically saying, and I've heard other people say this, is that nothing against Sam. Everybody loves Sam. He's a great guy.
Everybody loves him.
Yeah, but it's not working, and I think he's ready to walk away. Also, when that job opens up, and if they go get somebody that gets people excited, they're going to be able to generate some money and stuff like that. It becomes an interesting job because it's a big growth corridor area of the country.
Absolutely.
The curious part for me will be if you're like a Rhett Lashley, do you leave SMU for Arkansas? If you're a John Sumrall, do you stay at Tulane and wait for Kentucky, or do you go, nope, there's a bird in the hand, I'm going to take it? Those are some of the kind of people that I'll be kind of curious about. Because you're right, a guy like that who comes in, who understands NIL, who has some head coaching experience, can he get people excited? A Kane Womack, if Alabama were to win a national title, something like that. And there's just a lot of people that are out there that you hear their names attached to it. The guy at Texas State, you hear some of these young names attached to it, and you're like, yeah, that'd be interesting, and so.
You think, and somebody asked me this the other day, and I thought about it long and hard. You know how many times Mike Gundy has flirted with going to the freaking SEC? Like, it's been enough to get him multiple contract extensions.
Yeah.
Would it be time to make a jump? If you're going to jump, wouldn't Arkansas going to be enticing? I'm not saying Arkansas would be interested.
I'm not sure if I'm Arkansas, that's the route I want to go. It feels a little stale at this point. Like, there was a time when, that made a lot of sense. Like when Tennessee made a run at Gundy, it made a lot of sense. But I think that ship has sailed. I would want to go with a little. I'm not saying that Gundy's a dirty guy. I don't mean it like that. I would just be.
No, I know.
I'd want to go with a little cleaner canvas, I think.
You got a lot of shit going when you hire Mike Gundy. I mean, it is what it is. And it's not bad stuff. It just.
Yeah, I don't know. He seems like the guy who always talks about leaving Oklahoma State. He's probably never going to leave Oklahoma State. He's got
because that's the fear right now within the program. And talking with a couple folks is that, okay, this is for real now. He's not looking for a contract extension. What's he going to do? Go get money from T. Boone Pickens, in-laws, like kids? Like it's, pretty much it's like, okay, maybe it is time to go after flirting for so many years. So that's just one name that's been thrown out there that's going to be looking for potentially another job after the season's over. And, I'm interested to see, what could happen with that, because the whole Big 12 is so screwed up and screwed up. I mean, there's so many decent teams in there. I think a lot of coaches are going to get some looks, at other conferences, because you have to remember this too, like, and not you, but the folks out there. The way we are headed now in college athletics, some of these programs, man, are ready to set their future up right now. They don't want to wait for a year or two. They'd rather do it now. So that's why I think if you're a coach, the seat is even warm, I would be kind of worried, because these programs know what's coming in the future and they're trying to prepare for it now.
And if you can get a Big Ten or SEC job, you should take it.
Absolutely. Without a doubt.
All right, last thing, we started with Ole Miss. We'll end with Ole Miss. Ole Miss in South Carolina, Saturday afternoon at Williams-Brice Stadium. At the end of the day, what do you expect?
Yeah, I expect Ole Miss to go in there and win by 10 points. I mean, I do. I expect them to have it. It's like somebody put a rocket up their ass and said, you screwed up this past weekend, and there were mess ups all across the board, from coaching to players, could go on and on. I think this is just an opportunity for Ole Miss to kind of right a wrong. But do not be surprised when South Carolina is hanging in the fourth quarter and Ole Miss has got to throw a couple body blows to end it. So I do think this could be a turnaround game. I don't care, and this is not a shot, I don't care that Jackson Dart held a team meeting with the offense. Guys, they meet every freaking day. Yeah. He could tell them that shit on a Monday. It does not matter.
People blew that so far out of proportion. My God.
He held a team meeting. No shit. They're with each other every day.
They meet all the time. It was just the offense that met. Offense meets every Sunday. That is the stupidest. There are people.
He was
There are people on our beat that are just clickbait, 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 clickbait. It's like, oh, okay. What did you
yes,
think? Did you think that on September the 29th, after the day after Kentucky and 6 days before South Carolina, that they would just take the day off? They wouldn't meet. I mean, is that what you thought the offense might not go over the film from the previous, like they always do every single game? I mean, stop. Hey,
yes,
newsflash, they're going to have a team meeting on Sunday too.
right. And oh, by the way, Jackson Dart will speak up in that meeting on Sunday too.
He's the
It's just
quarterback.
how it is.
He's the third
Right.
year starting quarterback. He's probably going to talk.
Yes,
It's
I hate that shit. I hate it.
I'm with
It's
you.
like, oh, the program's going to turn around because Jackson Dart had the guys come in 5 minutes early to say something to him. Good luck. No,
Not
that's
changing
shit. So
anything. Not changing anything one way or the other. And the people that go, see, this is a sign that it's chaos. I'm like, no, it's not. They had a meeting.
no,
They were going to meet. That's what they do on Sundays. They watch film. They meet. They lift. They come back in on Monday and they practice, and they'll do it again the next Monday. It's just that's a football season.
So I think Ole Miss wins, and it's not because of a team meeting. Yeah, I think Ole Miss wins on Saturday, and it's not because of what Jackson Dart said Sunday morning to his offense.
No, if they win on Saturday, it'll be because they established some running game.
Yes.
Their offensive line has some continuity, and they don't commit a bunch of costly turnovers. They're better than 1 for 10 on third down. It's not all the goofy stuff. It's football.
No. It's going to be a tough game, and just expect it. And if you're going, enjoy Williams-Brice because it's a fun stadium, and the places around there are really cool. And yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's going to be an interesting game, but I do think Ole Miss kind of puts it away. They're in the fourth quarter, and they get out of there with a win, and they can focus on LSU. And then it's like we previously talked about. Focus on LSU, one game at a time, win. Okay, you set yourself up to be in the playoff conversation. But, like Neal, you know this. They lose on Saturday. The dam will burst. All hell will break loose. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the storylines are coming out of that one.
Where will you be Saturday?
Actually, I'm going to park myself.
Oh,
I'm gonna take a weekend. I've been on the road 4 weeks straight. I'm gonna take a weekend and just not travel because I got to go to Eugene, Oregon, the following week for Ohio State versus Oregon. And it was kind of up in the air because I was like, all right, I'm gonna go to Baton Rouge for LSU Ole Miss. And then it's like, okay, Ole Miss lost. And it's like, okay, all right, let's see. So really I have two options. It's either going to be Eugene or it's going to be Baton Rouge, depending on what Ole Miss does this weekend against South Carolina. If they win, that's a very big game in Baton Rouge. And then, then I'll get to come back home and stay because I live in East Tennessee. Alabama and Tennessee are playing. I would rather be. Here's the thing that's preventing me from going to Austin. I would love to go to the Georgia-Texas game. God, I would. But F1 is having a race in Austin, Texas the same weekend. It's like, if I'm going to pay for a hotel, I'm going to have to stay 200 miles away and pay $500 because everybody and their mother from around the country is coming into Austin. So I'll get Tennessee and Alabama 15 minutes from me. So it's like, all right, go cover that one.
That's a no-brainer. How can people catch your work, Trey?
Yeah, follow me on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Trey Wallace _. Follow all my work at Outkick.com. And yeah, man, we're continue rolling. What feels like we're 2 months into the season. We're only 4 weeks, so got a long way to go.
As always, my guy, I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, buddy, for having me.
Michael Katz does a really, really good job, as I've said when David Eckert was on. Really too good of a job. I'd be happier if Michael would do a worse job covering Ole Miss for the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Michael, thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Get your Dodger stuff. Dodgers getting ready for the playoffs. Who are you scared of the most? The Padres?
Padres, absolutely. I was watching that game last night, and I thought to myself, I know exactly what's about to happen on Saturday. I know. I've seen this one before. I've seen it the last 2 years in a row. Last year it was the Diamondbacks. The year before that was the Padres. It's always that team that got hot late.
They're hot. It'll be a hell of a series. As a Cubs fan, I will watch the Dodgers Padres series with just absolute envy, jealousy, not even rage, just sort of a a surrendered. Why can't we ever be that? We should look like that. We don't look like that. That will be my thoughts. But it'll be a hell of a series. I wouldn't want to be a fan of one of the two teams because so many great players.
I was feeling really good about a month ago, and then the pitching staff kind of fell apart, and right now it's just like it's popsicle sticks held together with failing UCLs. Like that is the Dodgers rotation right now. Like it's rough. It's really rough.
Kind of sounds like Ole Miss's offensive line. What happened in your opinion? You're around it as much as I am, but you have a different set of eyes. And what, as you were watching Saturday unfold down a few seats from where I sit, what was going through your mind? What do you think happened?
I mean, it's interesting because this is the game where I think we all said we were going to learn what this offensive line was. And I think we did, and it seems like it's a little bit of a problem. They got pushed around big time. I mean, there was no push. They were getting moved backwards. It just seemed like every time Jackson dropped back to pass, there was someone in his face or there's someone getting in his lane. The runs were difficult. I know Parrish got going a little bit in the second half, but everything just looked really, really hard. And if you were looking at the center, the guards, it was just they were getting pushed back. And I know that Kentucky has that really, really good interior. That's what they do. They beat you up. They want to do that. But, we've heard so much about how they thought that this group was improved. If the Kentucky game was an indication, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. And it's got to get a lot better because there's a lot of really good defensive lines in the SEC they're about to see.
Yeah, including one on Saturday in Columbia. Do you think they didn't try, they being Ole Miss, they didn't try to establish the run because A, they couldn't, B, they just didn't believe in it, C, they were panicked because of Kentucky eating so much clock and every possession mattered, or is it D, kind of all of the above?
It's probably a little bit of all of it, but I think that when you're game planning for something like that and you know that maybe your offensive line isn't going to win a ton of those battles, inside you try to do something else. I think that's why we saw a lot of throws out to the side to Trey Harris on those hitch routes, a lot of stuff to the perimeter to try to get away from this sort of disaster, the mess that was happening in the middle of the field. I think that in a perfect world, Ole Miss always wants to establish the run because it sets everything else up. But I think Kentucky was always going to be a really, really tough one to establish the run against.
Did Ole Miss get cocky? Did they read their clips too much? Did they take this one for granted, or was this just a game where they lost? I mean, I know they could have easily won it, right? I mean, they won the line of scrimmage. I mean, they had 6.5 yards of play. Kentucky was like 4.7. There were a lot of metrics that would have pointed, if you didn't see the score, you would have looked at it and said, okay, they win the game. But there were some issues, and then at the end of it, they lose. Those 4 games leading up to it, you were at all 4 of them. I was too. I'm not sure that people really appreciated how little this team was tested at all. And I kind of wonder if this team got a little, I think cocky's the right word, arrogant, overconfident. Did they just think, hey, this is easier than we even dreamed it would be?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at the schedule, like Kentucky was supposed to be one of the gimme games on their schedule, just in terms of if you're looking at what's coming up with South Carolina and Oklahoma and Georgia and those games coming up, those were supposed to be the one, and LSU, of course, those were the ones that were supposed to be, the coin flips, or the ones that were supposed to be tough. Kentucky was supposed to be one of the ones that you're supposed to get fairly easily. I mean, they were a 15.5-point favorite for a reason. I know that doesn't always mean everything, but Vegas usually understands where teams are. I think that for the first time all year, they got punched in the mouth, and they got punched in the mouth really, really hard. And I don't know if they were sure how to respond to it in the middle of a game. That first drive, it was so interesting because it looked so easy. It's like they were playing Georgia Southern. I mean, it was, and I remember sitting there, I was like, maybe they are as good as they looked against those 4 other teams. And then it just sort of got really hard. and they didn't adjust. And I don't think that they had to do a ton of adjusting this year, because everything that they had done for the most part worked. I know adversity happens in the middle of games, but they're still winning by 30 or 40 in those games. You don't have to adjust that much. This was a game where they had to adjust, and they just really weren't able to when it mattered in the places where it mattered. It was for me, I'm a big, like, what do they do at halftime? And I think they did, they did produce more offensively in the second half, yardage wise. The running game got going a little bit. But at least I was expecting things to really open up in the third quarter. I thought this was going to be like the Tulane game, right, where it was really, really close. And then, when Trey Harris scored that touchdown, I was like, here it goes. The dam is broken. This is it. They're going to win by.
I started working on my column right there. I'm like, okay, I know the rest of this. I'm going to get ahead.
Yeah.
They just scored. Now the crowd's crazy. They're in it. They're going to get a stop. They're going to get it back. They're going to score again. Kentucky's going to have to get out of their game plan and go into panic mode. And this is going to be a 17-point game, where you're going to have to debate whether do they really, what was it? It was like you said, the Tulane game last year. Was that a warning sign, or was that just what it was? And I was kind of going there, and then the Harris fumble happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like every time you thought that Ole Miss was going to do that thing where they break away and they go for the jugular, they ruined it. It was penalties. It was the Harris fumble. It was just like every time that it looked like the game was over, Kentucky and Ole Miss both made sure it wasn't, for different reasons. Ole Miss got in its own way. I don't think there's any way around that. Yeah, it was just really surprising to, we've seen, Ole Miss offenses break open games and have those big plays at the end of games, but I kept waiting for it to happen. I kept waiting for that moment, and I thought the Trey Harris play was the moment, but there had to be a moment to follow it, and that moment to follow it just never happened, and that was just really surprising for me.
So obviously this is a huge game Saturday. I've been saying, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, and it'll make for a fun conversation. I think this is the biggest game of the Lane Kiffin era at Ole Miss. I mean, and if they win it, next weekend becomes the biggest game of the Lane Kiffin era at Ole Miss. Because and again, this is kind of my little thesis here. Feel free to go, no, you're an idiot, and here's where you're wrong, and I'm open to that. When you go playoffs or bust, it's playoffs or bust. There is not an in-between area, right? It's like your Dodgers. It's kind of World Series or bust. If they win the World Series or maybe even get to the World Series, it's a successful season. If you don't, it's not. You spent all this money on Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto and all that stuff. You built this roster to go to the World Series, to win the World Series. And if you don't get there, it's failure. And there's no other really word for it, even though we don't really like using that word. And for Ole Miss, if they don't go to the playoff, it's failure. This team was built for the playoff. The budget was for the playoff. It was all designed for the playoff. And if you don't get to the playoff, it's a failure. There is no, well, it was almost successful. No, it was you either get an A or you get an F. There's no B's distributed here, no C's. There's no D's. There's just an A or an F. And so if they lose Saturday, it's an F. Because if they lose to Kentucky and South Carolina, there's just not a realistic path to the playoff, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. If they beat South Carolina, then LSU becomes this massively huge game. And if they win it, well, then you can start to get back into that spot. If they lose it, you're kind of done. You agree or disagree?
Yeah, no, I'm not generally one for like hyperbole and like definitive statements, but like, the season is over if they don't win this weekend. I mean, it's everything. I know you can say 1 week at a time, and this expanded playoff allows a little bit more room for error. But if you lose your first two SEC games, and you still got LSU coming, and you still got Oklahoma coming, and you still got Georgia coming, the odds of you winning every single one of those games pretty low. You're not going to get in with 4 losses. You're just not. You're going to end up in the Citrus Bowl, and that's not what this team was built for. So I I agree, and that's why I think this weekend is so fascinating. Like how I know that they stay calm and they talk about we're not overreacting and all that kind of stuff, but I have to think that people in that building understand what this weekend is.
Yeah, right?
You would think, like, I don't know how you can't, and I don't think it's a bad thing to understand the gravity of the situation. Maybe it's a good thing to understand that you need to win this game. Maybe if that's the mentality last week, things go a little bit differently, but it looked like they were going through the motions for a lot of last week.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated Saturday, just to see what the mindset is. There's a lot of little things. Like I'm curious to see what guys kind of wear getting off the bus. Like, are you kind of locked in? Are we doing fashion show? And I'm not saying they lost because of fashion show. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes I do think you get a little idea for where mentality is, and kind of what you're thinking about, where your focus is. And they're kids. I get it. But man, you ought to be kind of locked in right now because it's pretty big, and that is a difficult place to play. It gets loud. The feeling among South Carolina people around their program is, yeah, we lost that game to LSU, but we could have easily won it, probably should have won it had it not been for a couple of calls and a bad decision on a crackback block. We win the game. We're undefeated. We're the ones that are 12th, 13th in the country, and people are starting to talk about a scenario where South Carolina contends for the playoff. That's where their mindset is. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see if Ole Miss can match that or bypass that level of intensity, because I do think it's going to be a very intense kind of hostile environment that Ole Miss walks into.
What happens if Ole Miss turns the ball over early and South Carolina gets ahead early? And it's a 10, 14-point game early, and that crowd gets into it. How do they respond to that? I don't know if I know the answer yet. I think last year I knew how they'd respond. They'd probably figure it out, and they did for the most part last year, other than a couple of games. I don't know that about this team this year because, last week they had adversity and they weren't able to get over it. It's going to be another beast on the road here.
Oh, it's a totally different deal, Michael. It's one of those weird environments too, because it's not Neyland Stadium or Tiger Stadium or Bryant-Denny or whatever, but that place, it gets loud. It gets sort of. I was there in 2008. It was my first year on the Ole Miss beat, and it was a Thursday night, and I think it was the night that they started the sandstorm thing. And man, it was so loud, you literally couldn't hear yourself think. I had something happen to me the other day. I was working in here, and for some reason we'd had to change some of the speaker settings, and I was trying to get it back to the original setting, and this computer that I'm staring at right now was so loud that I couldn't focus on what I was trying to do. And I remember it made me think about that night. You couldn't think. You gotten down on the field. It was in the last few minutes, and they smelled the blood, and you just couldn't really think about, okay, it was crazy like that. And I think that impacted other people. I've watched an Alabama team just unfold in that stadium before. It was a Nick Saban team. Those teams typically have a lot of poise about them. I think the early portion of the game is so critical for Ole Miss, because if they can take a lead, it's still South Carolina. They're coming off some poor seasons. They'll go, okay, well, it's not our day. But man, you let them hang around on a game that starts at 3:30, let them get to 5:30. Everybody's pretty liquored up by 5:30. That place is going to get a little rough. And you're right. I mean, I go back to I'm rambling now, but like Jackson Dart said, I think you asked him, what are you most looking forward to? I think it was your question. And he said, I want to see what happens when we get adversity. Well, here you are, man. Here it is. This last dance thing that you all have done, it's right there on the brink now.
Yeah, I thought about that quote. I think it was asked right before the first game against Furman, sorry. And he said, yeah, I want to see how this team handles adversity. They didn't really have much adversity in the first 4 games. They had it last week, and they did not handle it. How do you rally the troops this week? Like, how do you keep everybody listen, in this NIL era, like we're seeing guys who sort of get disengaged when things aren't going well. Do you worry about guys, maybe mailing it in if you lose 2 games because the playoffs not there and that's why you got here? Like there's so many ways that this whole thing could fall apart if they don't win this weekend outside of just the playoff thing. Like the team itself, how it's constructed, I think it all kind of hinges on what happens over these next 2 weeks.
Oh, I do too. 100%. And you're exactly right. When you bring in these outside people under the premise of, it's why, and you and I have talked about this, the whole Last Dance thing, I get it. It's a cool little marketing thing, and I kind of get what people are saying, but I always was like, do you really completely understand the narrative behind The Last Dance? Everybody left at the end of The Last Dance. Literally everyone. There was like Tony Kukoc stayed. Everybody else left. They brought in, I don't even remember Tim Floyd, the coach.
Yeah.
After that,
it sounds right.
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't Michael and Scotty and Dennis and Phil anymore. That was a completely different thing. And they literally had the thing at the end where everybody put their memory into the thing and they lit it on fire and went their separate ways, and that was it. And I was like, that's an odd thing I get it, but if they don't win if they lose one of these next 2 games, especially if they lose this one on Saturday, the questions get different. I thought Lane was not testy, but a little defensive on Monday. I can't imagine how defensive he'd be next Monday. And you have to start asking guys the question that guys kind of bristled at before the season when I would say, and I heard some other people doing it too, you may have done it. Hey, is this playoffs or bust? Is it failure if you don't make the playoffs? And I know the people will do the thing of, well, it's still one game at a time. Beat LSU, beat Oklahoma, beat Arkansas, beat Georgia. Okay, but there's a lot there. And even then, you'd have a couple of really rough losses on the resume. What happens? I just think the noise around the program would get deafening with the loss in Columbia.
I agree. It's fascinating, especially in this transfer portal era with team construction. Like, how do you keep everybody on the same page when things aren't going right? I mean, in the older days, you'd have guys who came up as freshmen. They understand the culture. They've been there the whole time. They've been through these experiences before. And yeah, Ole Miss has some guys like that. I know Jackson's a transfer, but it seems like Jackson has been at Ole Miss forever at this point. So, like, you don't worry about how he is going to handle things. But you've got some of these guys who are basically one-year free agents. Like, how are they going to handle things if it doesn't go well? Because you came here told that you're here to win a national championship. Well, if you're out of the national championship picture before the bye week, what happens to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I'm Ole Miss, I'm just praying I don't go there, because if you win Saturday, you can recycle to next week, and if you win next week, you can go, okay, well, we just traded. We traded a win. We traded Kentucky for LSU. We'll find out down the road whether that was a good trade or not, but that's the trade. And you can get back kind of into the narrative of, okay, we're on the path of, you maybe could still lose to Georgia and you're still good to go, as long as it's not a blowout loss or whatever. But yeah, it's like right here. And it feels, I think the shocking part, maybe you agree or disagree, is that you go from these 4 blowout, complacent people bitching about, hey, they fell from 5th to 6th because Tennessee went to Oklahoma and won, to suddenly the season's on the line in like 8 days.
Crazy. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. It's funny you bring up the ranking thing. Somebody got like really, I'm an AP voter this year, and somebody got really mad at me because they thought I dropped Ole Miss too far. I put them at 13. They ended up at 12. And somebody, I think the person unfollowed me, was like so upset with this. And I was like, listen, first of all, there's a whole committee that is going to figure this out. What I'm doing right now does not matter. And 2, there's a lot bigger things that are happening than them moving down to 13.
Well, I mean, you could justify not ranking them. I mean, they've not done anything. I mean, their biggest win right now is Georgia Southern. I mean, that's, and now they've played one team with the pulse and they lost. I mean, obviously, I think Ole Miss is clearly a top 25 team, but I don't. Where are they 12? I mean, you have them one spot below. There's people. Yeah, the ranking is the least of their concerns. Their biggest concern right now is offensive front. And then I hate to even ask you this because you might throw something through the screen, but what do you think is happening with Ulysses Bentley? Why is he not playing?
That's the big mystery, isn't it? And it just even Lane sort of, like you said, testy isn't the word, but he was like, you guys ask me this every time I'm up here. It feels like the answer has always been, or at least this far has been, well, the other guys are playing really well. And maybe that was the case the first few weeks when Matt Jones is playing well against bad teams. But I think he had 8 yards last week. On his carries and Henry Parrish, he looked okay. He ended up getting his yardage, but he was working for all of it. And so I don't know. It's fascinating because it's not like Bentley's an unknown. We know what he is. We've seen him do it before. I mean, he ran for 500 yards last year. Now, of course, he was injured, and and again they're keep things very close to the vest on that. But we were led to believe that he's in a pretty good spot right now, health-wise. It's interesting because, again, look at Henry Parrish. He's not the biggest dude. You're going to need somebody to take some of that wear and tear off. Again, I know people don't like to talk about Quinshon Judkins, but you knew that Quinshon could be a bell cow. You knew that he could carry it 30 times if you needed him to. I don't think you want to put Henry Parrish through that because I don't know if his body type is really for that. So if you don't have that, you think you need somebody else. I don't, Matt Jones is a really nice player. He's done some really nice things in his opportunities, but you got to think Bentley would add something, right? I mean, we've seen the explosiveness.
I mean, in a world where this goes wrong, one of the questions that has to be asked is, did you make a mistake letting Quinshon Judkins walk away? I mean, this is professional sports, right? And so if you're covering a professional sports team and that team, I'll take my team. I'm a Cubs fan. The Cubs released Kyle Schwarber. They traded Yu Darvish. It's fair to ask in hindsight, was that a mistake? Should you have kept Schwarber? Should you have not done the Darvish deal? Should you have economically come up with the money to justify keeping Yu Darvish in your rotation? Should you have given Kyle Schwarber another year to emerge as a major league consistent hitter? Those are fair questions. And so I think it's a fair – it doesn't mean that it's a right or wrong. Maybe, Jed Hoyer might go, no, we did the right thing trading Yu Darvish. It made sense, and here's why. But I do think it's a legitimate question that I don't know who's going to ask it. Maybe it's me. Maybe if it comes to that, maybe it's you. Maybe it's nobody. Maybe we all look at each other and go, it's not worth it. But should you have worked it out? Should you have worked it out? Because you'd worked it out before the Peach Bowl. When he came back one more time, should you have worked it out again?
I mean, there were times in that Kentucky game where at least I thought to myself, they miss him right now. You miss being able to keep those drives alive. You miss the hard running to wear teams down and stay on the field. They don't have that sort of guy right now. And I know that his numbers were down last year from where he was as a freshman. He still ran for 1,100 yards and a bunch of touchdowns. He's a first-team All-SEC guy. He's really, really good. And I understand that, there were some issues, and he left for whatever reasons he wanted to. But it's hard to deny that he won't have made a difference in a game like last week.
Yeah, and had they let him go earlier, they might have Etienne on their roster right now, who would be a better back than I think what they've got. I think it's that transaction, if this goes south, is worth asking about. All right, your opinion, what does happen Saturday? What are the things you're watching for? Do you anticipate that they get out of this with a win, or do you think this does go south?
I've gone back and forth on this a lot just because road games in the SEC are just so weird, and especially one like this where Ole Miss is in such a volatile state. I think that this is a game they probably win close. I think it's going to be a very close game, like a field goal, touchdown, something like that. I think the biggest things that I'm looking at, we talked about the offensive line. It's going to be a different challenge this week because now you've got these two extremely good ends. You've got a 5-star kid on one side, and I think the SEC leader in sacks on the other, in Kennard. That's a different sort of challenge, and maybe that helps Ole Miss because I think, at least for Jackson, rushing up the middle is probably a little bit tougher than when you've got it coming outside and you can move up in the pocket. But I don't think you want to see pass rushers either way. It's going to be interesting to see, especially if Jaden Williams isn't able to play, how do they handle that speed rush? Because if Jackson is hurried again, it's not going to be as Jackson's been at his best with clean. Of course, all quarterbacks are better with clean pockets.
Yeah.
But we saw last week when he was hurried or he has to think a little bit too much. It doesn't go as well as we saw earlier in the year. So I'm fascinated to see how they scheme that up. And I know that we've, at least I asked about Caden Prescore and where he's been. I think he's been a blocker a lot lately. And is that what you have to do again? Because if he does block, you're missing a whole part of the field because he is so good in the middle of the field on those intermediate throws, and you're just totally missing those now where it's either a long ball to Harris or a hitch route to Harris or something deep down the field and you hope for a PI. The middle of the field was just sort of not there without Prescore. And so how they handle the edge rush, I think, is going to be fascinating. I know Sellers is a really athletic guy. He's young. He looked really good against LSU before he got hurt. Those running quarterbacks can absolutely wreck a game because you think that you've got the perfect defense and they make a play and they get a first down and you have your heart ripped out and then they score a touchdown right after that. How they handle him, I think, is going to be really interesting because, again, we know Ole Miss has a great defensive line, but Sellers can break contain. It's not always going to matter. I think how they handle him, whether they use a spy, whatever Pete Golding decides to use, I think is going to be really, really interesting because, Brock Vandegrift ran the ball pretty well against them last week.
He did.
Which was surprising. He was really good at picking up. It was like those 3rd and 4s where you're like, they're going to get off the field and he runs ahead and he gets it by an inch. Or when they put Wimsatt in and he's able, on obvious running downs, able to get yardage. I think the quarterback run, stopping that is going to be really interesting too.
Yeah, I do too. I think it just has a chance to just be absolutely sort of fascinating psychology a little bit because it's a big opportunity for South Carolina too. I mean,
absolutely.
If they win, I'm looking at their schedule here. I mean, if South Carolina gets a win, they go to Alabama after that, which is difficult, but it becomes sort of free shotty. They get Oklahoma. The rest of the tail end of their schedule is kind of doable. They could have a pretty decent year where they have some program momentum. And unlike Kiffin, who seems to be a build it 1 year at a time guy, I think Beamer is trying to do the program build. So using the portal, but still building internally and stuff. So it's a clash of styles and stuff. It should be quite interesting on Saturday. I really appreciate your time. I'll see you in Columbia. Safe travels.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Chris Clark covers South Carolina for On 3, Gamecock Central. Known Chris a long time from back in his Rivals Network days. They do a great job covering the Gamecocks. Appreciate you being with us.
Yeah, Neal, thanks for having me. Always good to be with you. And you don't know this, I'm going to ask you to return the favor later this week by being on our radio show, if you don't mind. So
I will be happy to.
Well, yes, awesome. Glad to be here, though. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So let's start with the real world stuff for a minute. Helene went through Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, all the Virginia. Virginia's dealing with a lot of stuff right now. What's the situation there in Columbia and just in the state of South Carolina as a whole in the aftermath of what has been just an absolute horrific storm?
Yeah, I'm following a lot of the stuff in Western North Carolina and other places from afar like everybody else. And I haven't ventured outside of Columbia since everything happened. At my house, the Clark household, we still don't have power. So we have been toughed it out for a couple nights at the house, and but we have been staying with some family on the other side of Columbia for a couple nights, and looks like that'll probably be the case for a few more days, at least. So, a lot of property damage around Columbia. Talked to some people who had, obviously power outages, but, trees go through their homes and things like that. And you see some of the very real issues with, unfortunately, fatalities. I mean, we had a couple firefighters in the Midlands who unfortunately lost their lives going out trying to help people, and, a tree falls. And, you see the devastation in North Carolina, like in the Asheville area, where homes are gone, and or lives are lost. And I was telling somebody this morning, man, like, it's frustrating to not have power, but then you get some perspective. You go, we don't need power. At the end of the day, people have it so much worse. So certainly thinking about all those people and praying for them, because it's been so much worse. But power is starting to come back on, and roads being cleared and things like that. I would say the folks who work for the energy companies and the tree services, they've been tremendous. A lot of them are sleeping in their trucks. They're sleeping in parking lots of Costco and cots and things like that. So they've done an amazing job, and I hope everybody appreciates the work that they're doing.
Yeah, it's such real world stuff. And you see those pictures out of like Asheville. And my wife's uncle has a property up in the mountains. It's such a beautiful place. And then you see that they're trapped, and they can't really get out of the mountain. They don't have internet. They don't have power. It's hard to get food. It's hard to get gas. And then you see the pictures of like Asheville, which is a beautiful town. And you see the pictures of what it looks like. It's just, I don't know. It's just so disheartening, honestly. It is. You look at that, and then it's kind of hard to turn around and go, well, let's talk about football. But the people that are listening to us want us to talk about football, so we shall. South Carolina coming off an open date. They are a really stupid penalty away from unbeaten and probably like, 8th, 9th, 10th in the country. I mean, it's a crackback block on a quarterback that wasn't going to catch the guy. Otherwise, they're undefeated today, I think. What has this team been compared to what you expected, maybe? What is this team compared to what you expected? What will Ole Miss encounter on Saturday afternoon in Columbia?
I was going to ask you if you meant the penalty was dumb on South Carolina's part or the officials, but there were some of both. That's a great point.
I mean, you shouldn't have to call it because it wasn't going to affect the play, but at the same time, it's like, why are you trying to decleat the Garrett Nussmeier? Yeah. He's not catching him.
There were some on both sides of that coin, and gosh, we spent way too long litigating and relitigating all that, so we won't do it. But there were some others that have not been talked about as much, but have been talked about plenty locally here. But yeah, Lane Kiffin pointed out the same, like a penalty away from being undefeated. And I think, Neal, like you look at this South Carolina team, some things are about what you thought, some things are a little better, maybe some things are a little bit worse. This is a team that has been tested, right? And I don't know if some Ole Miss people get mad at me for saying this or not, but it is my perspective of it, not being in Oxford, not covering that program every day. From my view, Ole Miss had really not been tested before the Kentucky game, right?
I don't think anybody.
You look at the quality.
I don't think anybody, Chris, would argue that now. It was brutally obvious on Saturday that Ole Miss had played 4 cupcakes. Only one has a flicker of a pulse, and that's Georgia Southern. I mean, Wake Forest is just bad. And I said it a lot. I think people got tired of hearing it, even though they kind of knew it was true. The one thing about the Kentucky game that kind of worried me from an Ole Miss perspective, and I thought Ole Miss would win and win big, but the one thing that kind of worried me was, man, they have played nobody. And the 4 teams that they have played, if those 4 teams played, I mean, throw Mississippi State out. They're bad. Let's take the next 3 bad teams in the league: Arkansas, Florida, Auburn. Okay? If those 3 teams had played Ole Miss's their schedule, they would be undefeated. I mean, Arkansas would blow out Middle Tennessee. Florida would blow out Furman. Auburn would kick the hell out of Wake Forest. And they just would. I mean, so it was, you didn't know really what, and I still think Ole Miss is a good team, but they weren't battle tested. And Kentucky had played South Carolina. Kentucky had played Georgia. So they were, they'd gone through some adversity. And so they were a little more prepared for what happens when two SEC teams get together.
Yeah, and I think that matters. And, so when you look at South Carolina to try to kind of answer your question, they played Old Dominion in game one and won, which is at the end of the day the result you want, but it was very meh, very blah. It was ugly offensively. They gave up, defense played well, but they gave up a couple explosives for touchdowns, a long touchdown pass, a quarterback run for a touchdown. And people around here were just kind of, oh, is this what it's going to be like? And so I think the proper thing to do was to try to have some perspective, which in 2024 we don't do very well as a society. But you kind of look at it and go, okay, it's fine to say, like, these things need to get better getting into conference play, which, by the way, happens next week on the road against Kentucky, particularly on offense. You look at South Carolina's offense, what they showed against ODU. It didn't inspire a ton of confidence that you can then go to Lexington and play a Mark Stoops physical Kentucky defense and go have success and win. But it also, what actually happened, showed us exactly why you do have to have perspective and say maybe that was a one-game aberration and you had a lot to clean up and you had a first-time starter at quarterback. They went out and kicked Kentucky's butt, frankly, for most of that game and ended up pulling away and blowing them out. You had Akron last week, same deal, not a very good team at all, bad football team. Blow them out, as they should, playing a backup quarterback. And then the LSU game, which either of those teams could have won. It was a heavyweight fight up front. Garrett Nussmeier, outstanding quarterback. Like, both teams threw punches back and forth, and you came out on the losing side. But I think what we do know is this offense is still a work in progress. They have questions at receiver. They have a young quarterback who's still progressing. They've had protection issues up front, and that's not just the O-line. That's their tight ends and backs. They have a really good running back in Rocket Sanders. Of course, he and Sellers, Lenore Sellers, the quarterback, both in question as of right now in terms of whether or not they'll play. I think Sellers will. We'll see on Rocket. I tend to think he probably will, but we got to see. Defensively, Neal, they look really improved. They've given up some plays, yes, but LSU has one of the best O-lines in the country. There were times in the game where it looked like LSU could not block South Carolina. They've done a really good job of bringing guys back and then sprinkling in some pieces from the portal along with a really big get as a freshman in Dylan Stewart.
There's a lot to get to there. It was a good answer. I'm curious about this. You see it every day. We see parts of it. Robbie Ashford comes in to replace Lenore Sellers, and they look a lot more one-dimensional against LSU without Sellers than they did when Ashford was in there. So what? Oh, I lost you. Had a little technical thing either on my end or Chris's. I'm not sure which. It doesn't matter. I was asking about the difference in the quarterbacks. How is South Carolina different with Lenore Sellers? How limited are they, or are they not, if they're forced to play Robbie Ashford for part or all of Saturday's game?
Both of those quarterbacks are pretty similar in that they're dual threat guys. And look, with Robbie against Akron, you do have to qualify that. You have to put a caveat on it. You have to put an asterisk. It's just Akron, right? But Ashford ran the offense against Akron and showed what he can do. I mean, he's a dynamic runner. Like, he's not just a guy that you look at and go, yeah, he can run around a little bit. He's a dynamic runner. And he showed that against Akron. He can escape the pocket. He showed that against Akron, but Neal, he's also showed it in his career, like at South Carolina, at Auburn when he was there. Like, he can run. But he also delivered some really beautiful downfield passes, yes, against Akron, but what you look for is if a guy's open, is he putting it on him? And he did that, right? So I think it's almost a little bit – people have gone a little bit too far of he can't throw the ball. I don't really think that's true. That said, Lenore Sellers is the starter for a reason, right? And it's also important to remember that Sellers is a guy that, when he went out there against Old Dominion, that was his first start. And we went out there against Kentucky, that was his first SEC start, by the way, on the road. And South Carolina's been without him for basically a half against LSU and for a portion of the game against Kentucky and for the entire game against Akron. And they're still 3-1, So I think with Sellers, he can also run, whether it's design power type runs. He's a big guy. He's got wheels. He ran a long touchdown on the design run keeper against LSU for a touchdown. But he can also throw the football. I think the biggest area where he's got to continue to grow, and Ashford too, even though he's a veteran player, get rid of the ball faster. Their questions at receiver, plus the protection issues, plus a young quarterback, I think all that's added up to have South Carolina 16 sacks, I think, this season, which, is towards the bottom of the conference, if not the bottom, and nationally, right? So that's an area that's got to get better. But I think some people would say when Ashford's been in there that he didn't run the full scope of the offense against LSU. I think in reality, they just gave him a lot of RPOs, and the result kind of was dictated by what decisions he made there. I think he's capable of running the offense. But again, Sellers is the starter for a reason. You would love to have him if at all possible, because the offense certainly, I think, has even more upside with him under center.
He's a dynamic player. The bit that I saw against LSU, especially, speaking of, in that LSU game, Rocket Sanders looked like Arkansas Rocket Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
He looked like that dude, as opposed to the guy last year who really struggled at Arkansas and then ultimately got shut down because he just couldn't get healthy. If he can't play, how big of a loss is that for South Carolina?
Huge loss. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, Neal. I mentioned the sacks, but Clark Brooks over at SEC StatCat has noted that now this was before this past week of action, so this might be, in need of an update. But before this past weekend of college football, Carolina was last in the SEC in terms of negative plays. And so a lot of it is what we talked about with sacks, 34 negative plays, 16 of them were sacks. But now you factor in, hey, you've had Rocket Sanders for a lot of that. So a lot of the issues have been blocking issues, whether it's O-line or perimeter. There have been some of both. Busted plays, whatever it may be. But what Rocket gives you is an opportunity of turning, not only the dynamic runs like the one we saw against LSU and the ones we saw when he was at Arkansas, especially in 2022, his big 1,400-yard season, but also just being able to break tackles, turning a loss into, let's get back to the line of scrimmage. You're turning a 1-yard gain, a 0-yard gain into 3 or 4. He can also do that for you. So he's even shown that this season here at South Carolina. So I do think he's gotten back to being himself. It was unfortunate that he had the injury against Akron, and we'll see where that leads for the Ole Miss game and for the rest of the season. I don't think it was serious, but it was serious enough to take him out of that game and kind of throw his status in question for this game. But he definitely gives them, he's their best back by far, in my opinion, and a guy that's been proven in this conference.
I do a show 3 times a week with Tyler Siskey, who's maintained that Dylan Stewart's the best defensive player in the SEC.
Wow.
He says he's the best defensive player in the SEC, and he's awfully good. So are some other players on that team. I asked Lane Kiffin about this. I was like, you just played Kentucky. They do so much of their damage. It's a typical Mark Stoops team, right? It's big. They do 2 things. They take away the run as best they can just by size in the interior, and then they limit explosives. They're great at it. For whatever reason, Kentucky doesn't give up a lot of big plays. They lose games, but you have to drive the field on them. This South Carolina is a completely different defense when you watch them because it's more speed, it's more twitch, it's more flying around. They have given up some plays. They've created a lot of turnovers. How good is this defense? How do you anticipate them attacking an Ole Miss offense that right now is pretty beat up front?
Yeah, the way that I would classify this defense is they are very capable of wreaking havoc, but the way that they play also does.
Hey, Chris, you muted yourself. There you go. You're good now.
I would say, Neal, that the thing about this defense is they are very capable of wreaking havoc, making big plays defensively, creating negative plays defensively. But the way that they play, their play style, that and how they kind of play with like their hair on fire, for lack of a better term or phrasing, is they do leave themselves susceptible at times for negative plays. It was almost like against LSU. LSU got down 17-0, and Garrett Nussmeier really. I mean, my respect level for him is off the charts after watching him. He took hits. The flop on that play you referenced notwithstanding, I guess that was just a smart play.
Yeah.
But
It worked.
It did work, and he delivered from arm angles, and they made some adjustments up front with what they were doing. They ran some different schemes, but Carolina missed some tackles in the run game. They had some gaps up front. Even going back to game one, Old Dominion, I think watching the tape back, Dylan Stewart, who you just talked about, it seemed like he kind of got out of a gap and was going to rush the passer and go make a play. And then now there's a parting of the Red Sea and it's a touchdown, right? So I think, in pass rush situations on third downs, you're in trouble. I mean, they are really, really good. They've got more depth at linebacker. They've got speed at linebacker. They're at least 4 deep at defensive tackle. All their defensive tackles are either a guy in TJ Sanders, who's a junior, who will probably be in the NFL after this year, or 4th, 5th, or 6th-year seniors. And then up front, they've not only got Stewart, but they've got some guys back who have been rotation players here or started games here. I'll tell you the secret sauce this year, Neal, for the Gamecocks up front has been Kyle Kennard from Georgia Tech, who it's crazy to think Georgia Tech at one point had Jared Ivey and Kyle Kennard on the team at the same time. And Kyle Kennard's just a grown man. And, when he was matched up against Will Campbell from LSU, who was maybe the best left tackle in the country, Campbell couldn't block him at times, just flat out couldn't. And Kennard's just a guy who's been around a while. He's played a ton of football, and he looks like he's on a mission this year. So I do see a lot of similarities, frankly, in the Ole Miss front, which is, how they built it way better than I have. Built it on high-level transfers who have experience and have talent. That's kind of how the Gamecocks have built it too. And I think there's some similarities in both these teams in that they've got questions up front, and the other team's defensive line is more than capable of exploiting, those issues up front.
I'm asking you to I guess, come up with a rationalization for people that you don't know, and I don't know either. But why is this line 9.5 points? It feels like a really big line. Ole Miss on the road, favored by 9.5. Is that just the uncertainty with South Carolina's injury situation?
Yeah, I would say it's that. And, look, LSU did come in here and LSU's strength is on their offense. They can score points. They've shown that. And they scored points even against a good Gamecock defense. South Carolina shut them down for a while, a quarter, a half, whatever. But then LSU came storming back. And look, I think the question, like Ole Miss, you don't look at this team and go, oh, they're just not good enough. Like Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, Reese Senior Bowl, said Ole Miss has the most draft graded guys in the entire country, which is, look at some of the teams out there that are absolutely loaded. They've got 20 NFL guys. You go up and down that roster and look at all the dudes that Ole Miss has. Let's not make too much of the Kentucky game, right? This is still a loaded team, defensively, offensively. I think that's the concern, right? South Carolina's injury situation, the fact that Ole Miss can definitely score points. The biggest thing, Neal, for me, when you look at Ole Miss against Kentucky, is exactly what you said earlier about the big plays. Jackson Dart's PFF grade on downfield throws 20 yards or more is still, even after the Kentucky game, almost 95, which is insane. 9 touchdowns and 1 pick. But against Kentucky, he was 1 for 7 on those throws. So that's really what Kentucky did, is they limited the huge plays in the run game, prevented Dart from getting loose. Trey Harris had a huge game, but, they didn't give up a bunch of 75-yard passes. South Carolina's still giving up some explosive plays, so I think that's probably the concern there. I would, if I'm setting the line, which thank the Lord I'm not, I'd lose a lot of money. I'd probably go a little bit smaller. I don't know who I'm going to pick yet as we sit here and talk. Not quite late enough for me. But it totally makes sense for me for Ole Miss to be favored. 9.5, 10, that might be a little bit high though for me.
Juice Wells in for a long pregame. He's going to probably hear some things.
Yeah, he is. I honestly think, man, that has been a little bit overblown. What happened was not overblown. Like that being the storyline or a dominant storyline going into this game, probably a little bit more overblown. Now, if Juice comes in and has a couple touchdowns, I have no doubt that Lane Kiffin, being the troll that he is, will attempt to draw up some plays for Juice in Williams-Brice Stadium. There's no doubt in my mind. It will be more of a talking point after the game if Ole Miss wins and he has a great game. But to me, this is about a couple teams that are both looking at an SEC game, South Carolina with LSU, Ole Miss with Kentucky, looking at it, the one SEC loss they have, saying we shouldn't have that loss on our record. And both of these teams are hungry, I think, for a win. And to me, that's the bigger storyline, and it's about who's going to play better. But yeah, Juice he'll hear a little bit, and if he makes some plays, he'll be able to dish it right back. So that part should be fun.
All right, you set up my last question, and I'm kind of curious because that place is usually really loud. I've been there a couple of times. One Thursday night in 2008 that sticks out was like, this is the loudest place I've ever been. You literally could not hear yourself think that night. How crazy do you sort of anticipate it being, and is it down just a tick because of what happened against LSU, or are people back?
No, the funny thing about the LSU game, Neal, is that it emboldened everybody, like the fan base and the team. The team was very disappointed after that game, ticked off, probably even more ticked off than disappointed. They knew they left some plays on the field, but quite frankly, Neal, the feeling around here is that they kind of got hosed on some calls. And I'm not talking even about the plays you referenced. I'm talking about a PI call that was completely phantom that wiped out a big play. I'm talking about, Lenore Sellers getting clotheslined and no call when that's supposedly a huge point of emphasis this year, et cetera. So even if you're saying, Chris, you're dumb, I watched those plays, they were clean. I'm just saying what the perception of the team and the fan base is, right? People walked away from that going, this is tough to swallow. And I think it actually validated the team, what they think about themselves, what Shane Beamer thinks, and the fan base. Fan base is going, we lost that game, but we shouldn't have. It's not like LSU. We've seen teams come in and beat the Gamecocks, even at Williams-Brice, handily. There have been some lean years not too long ago in that regard. That's not what happened. And so I think it's given people more confidence. So the atmosphere for the LSU game, even at noon, was off the charts. I think this one is going to be big time. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be very loud. We'll see how long that sustains, obviously, depending on how the game goes. But I think it's going to be one of the better environments we've seen here recently.
Should be a lot of fun. I look forward to visiting with you on your radio show later in the week. And Ole Miss in South Carolina, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central on ESPN at Williams-Brice, which is I think it's one of the really fun places in the league to watch a game because that place gets just bonkers sometimes, and it's kind of fun. Chris, again, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
All right, Neal, appreciate you having me.
Ben Mintz, Barstool Sports, kind enough to join us as always here for MPW Digital Extra. Benjamin, we'll start with what you and I were just talking about before the show. You picked Ole Miss to win and cover. I picked Ole Miss to win and cover. A lot of people picked Ole Miss to win and cover. Ole Miss not only did not cover, Ole Miss did not win. How surprised were you when you watched the game? And then looking back on it, what do you think kind of went wrong?
Well, I mean, yeah, I did, and I was way wrong. When you look back on it, though, maybe I was just being kind of dumb because Kentucky dominated that line of scrimmage against Georgia. And, man, their front seven, I mean, it's one of those things where we all play fantasy football in our free time, but it's about the line of scrimmage in the SEC. And that front seven for Kentucky, especially that defensive tackle, who's going to be a top 5 pick, just wreaked havoc on Ole Miss there in that game. And they completely dominated. And, Ole Miss couldn't get a stable running game going. And then on the defensive side, the Ole Miss defense played fine. It's just the DBs kept holding on key third downs and allowed Kentucky to keep drives alive. But I was surprised. I'm not going to sit here and act like I wasn't. I picked Ole Miss to win like 38-17. But, yeah, it was a horrible reality check. One thing looking back on it that you and I just talked about off the air was last year Ole Miss had the non-conference games at Tulane, which was a game until 5 minutes left in the fourth, and then they had the game against Georgia Tech, who was a bowl team, where Ole Miss pulled away in the fourth quarter. And just playing the 4 scrimmages, not getting in any kind of tight game situations, I think that was a factor in this game. Just like not – and, Ole Miss obviously didn't know how bad Wake Forest was going to be when they scheduled that game. But, man, Georgia Southern and Middle Tennessee and Furman, I mean, you kind of knew that with all those. Yeah. And I think kind of were tight, and I think the fact they didn't play a tough non-conference, I'm not even saying playing some like crazy non-conference game, just play somebody that'll make you challenged at least.
Yeah, you do want to play teams at some point that stress you a little, and they just were never stressed. And then I don't know. I'm not going to say they got cocky. I don't know that they were cocky. I don't know that. But I can tell you the fans were cocky. The fans were starting to talk about undefeated. And sometimes that stuff bleeds over to the team, especially at the college level. Not always, but sometimes. And, it's why I kind of have them circled Saturday, and I think they're going to go handle South Carolina. On the other hand, I just think it's going to be a really fascinating game. In fact, let's start there. Let's start there, because the line is
9.5, right?
Yeah, it's kind of moved. It's moved between 9.5. I'm looking for it here. I don't know. I must have missed it here.
Last I saw was 9.5, and my initial instincts on it were I thought it would come out at 7 or 7.5 because LSU was favored by 6 there a few weeks ago, and the fact that it came out at 9.5 off that Ole Miss loss tells you Vegas likes Ole Miss in this game, because that's a high line on the road at South Carolina, which made me feel better about it. It's just so fascinating, the dynamics of inside the locker room. And I know Jackson Dart called the team meeting Sunday, and you really find out what you're made of off the loss. But I mean, we'll find out everything we need to know about this Ole Miss team, because if they don't come out and even if they win this game, it's fine. But a loss here with all the NIL guys you got on the 1-year stuff, these guys didn't come into Ole Miss to go 8-4. I mean, if it goes bad, it could go bad. And this game's going to literally tell everything. And even if Ole Miss wins by 1, I don't care. They just got to win this game by any stretch necessary, because you lose. If Ole Miss loses this game and has 2 losses already with that Saturday night in Death Valley looming, I mean, it could get bad in a hurry.
So what do you expect Saturday in Columbia?
Okay, when I look at this matchup, and I'm good friends with Joe Sloan, the LSU OC, and I've been kind of texting with him about South Carolina a little bit. And so I'm kind of going off some of what he said it was like playing them. The concern is how good their front 7 is, especially Stewart, that freshman, who's a stud, who's going to be a top 5 pick, because the Ole Miss offensive line got exposed last week. That's the key to this entire game. South Carolina's got long corners. They're all 6'1", 6'2", but I don't think they're like elite or anything. So I think Trey Harris and Juice, obviously Juice Wells going back to South Carolina is a huge storyline. And the fact that he didn't do anything last week, I expect Ole Miss to really try to get him the ball this week. But the key is going to be the offensive line against the front 7. On the other side of the ball, I actually feel like Ole Miss matches up extremely well with South Carolina, because when you look at Walter Nolan and Pegues and Jared Ivey and Paul, I think Ole Miss's run defense looks really stout this year. And South Carolina doesn't have a great passing game. Sellers, the quarterback's coming off an ankle injury. He looks like he's going to go, but I don't know if he can run like he could. Rocket Sanders, the Arkansas running back, looks like he's going to be out from what I'm hearing. And I just feel like South Carolina's passing game, what I'm worried about in the Ole Miss defense is the DBs and the holding, et cetera. And I don't know that South Carolina can really expose that. So I think Ole Miss's defense should be fine in this game. It's just all about the offensive line against their front 7. And if the offensive line plays well, Ole Miss should be fine here. But having said that, when you look at the history of South Carolina football, they're really good in this underdog spot in these SEC games. Like they're always a team that like plays down to bad G5 teams, but then every year it seems like they pull one or two upsets at home. I remember them beating Tennessee with Hendon Hooker 2 years ago when he tore his ACL was an example of that. And so this is a super dicey game. Also, South Carolina dealing with a ton of fallout from that hurricane too. So a lot of dynamics in play here. I think Ole Miss's defense should be fine. It's just if the offensive line can block the front seven, the Rebs should be good.
I kind of like the under 53.5. I just don't
I do
hate
too.
it. Yeah, I don't hate it. I don't think I would touch the spread. If you made me, I think I'd take Ole Miss and lay the 9.5. I would not feel good about it. I do like the under. The South Carolina money line. I always like to look at those to kind of get an idea of what Vegas thinks is 270. Pretty heavy money line. Vegas thinks Ole Miss is going to win this game. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, what was really interesting to me was, like I said, it coming out at 9.5 off that Kentucky loss. South Carolina's off a bye, so they should be fired up and ready. Ole Miss has to play teams off byes back-to-back weeks. LSU's on one this week. But I think Ole Miss is going to come out. I'd like to see them make a statement, but I think they're going to be fine Saturday. I really think that this loss, is going to scare everybody straight. There's a lot of talent on this team, and I think Jackson Dart's a good leader, and the coaching staff's good. And there's going to be a sense of urgency. So, I'm still optimistic, and I'm still optimistic about the season. Look, obviously it was a disaster Saturday, but sometimes losing can kind of scare everybody straight and get everybody serious and people quit reading their own press clippings. And, we're going to find out everything we need to know Saturday at 2:30. But I'm still feeling pretty optimistic. You know me, though, Neal. I hate laying points on the road, especially in an SEC game. So I'm going to sit back and just cheer for Ole Miss here on Saturday. Probably going to take the under with you, though. I like that logic. I also wonder if Ole Miss is going to be able to really run the ball against that front seven here.
Missouri heads to Texas A&M Saturday. They get 2.5 in College Station. A real big game for the Tigers for sure.
Yeah, and so interesting. Missouri obviously won an OT over Vandy. They beat South Boston College but didn't cover. However, they're off a bye. A&M's quarterback situation, I've been texting Billy Lucci, the A&M, the King Aggie, who's my good friend, trying to figure out if Marcel Reed or Wegman's going to go. Last I heard, Wegman threw in practice, but, was trending towards playing, but not sure yet. I sort of think – I don't know. I feel like Missouri might pull a close one out here. Missouri, when you look at their schedule – they're off a bye, and they've got a loss at Alabama in a few weeks, but this is probably their second toughest game of the year. And if they're going to be a playoff contender, this is a game where you should see a big effort. It's 11 a.m., so I'm kind of leaning Missouri here, actually.
There's not a lot of great games this week. So I'm just going to touch a few, and when we get done, if I miss something that you love, just tell me. But I'm just like looking at things that look entertaining even, and there's not a ton. Iowa goes to Ohio State. The Hawkeyes have the one loss to the Cyclones, but it's a 20-point line. Do you like anything in that line right there?
Ohio State's had some slow starts this year on offense. I don't know if you've noticed that. They did it. They've done it a few weeks where they kind of start out stuck in mud. So maybe that'll keep this game close for a while. Iowa's actually been playing over since they fired Ferentz's son, who was a terrible OC. But yeah, I kind of think it'll start out close, and Ohio State will pull away second half and don't have a strong read. My buddies are trying to tell me to take the over, but I don't know if I can do it.
The over on that's 45. I kind of like the over, to be honest. Auburn, Georgia. I think Georgia's going to absolutely beat the hell out of Auburn. It's a 24-point line, and I know that's a huge number. I'm laying it.
Are you? Yeah. I don't think Georgia has any problem. Boy, that Auburn game last week, 500 yards of offense and losing. Man, whew, that pick six was rough. And, they lost at home to a true freshman without his top 5 wide receivers. That Oklahoma quarterback, you got to give that kid some credit. Who gets sent out as a true freshman on the road at Auburn without his top 5 receivers in his first SEC start? That's crazy. I don't think I've ever heard anything like that, literally.
He competed his ass off. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, Auburn's in trouble. It's 24. It's a rivalry game. Georgia's going to be pissed after last week. Auburn almost beat them last year too. But the only thing is just like I hate going to – Freeze always fights in these underdog spots historically. That's just kind of he struggles in the games when he's a favorite, and he sucks. And he's a great underdog. So I'm probably going to stay away.
West Virginia goes to Oklahoma State. The Mountaineers, Neil Brown really needs a win. They get 3.5 in Stillwater.
And Oklahoma State doesn't look very good either. They got blown out at Kansas State. They should have lost that Arkansas game. West Virginia's run defense is bad, though. Penn State ran over them, so this feels like a game where Ollie Gordon might get right. Over-under 64.5 here, high for a reason. I'm always hesitant about taking West Virginia in these spots because the cross-country traveling, too. So, I'm just telling you a long speech about saying I don't really know.
Alabama goes to Nashville coming off that big win over Georgia. They're laying 22.5 against the Doors.
It's an obvious letdown spot for Bama, but will they let down? I think DeBoer seems like a just unbelievable coach. And, I like his demeanor, too. He's not as fiery as Saban, but he really knows what he's doing. And then the play calling in that offense is looking so good. So, I think Bama ought to be fine. I do like Diego Pavia, though. That Vandy quarterback, we've seen them fight Missouri and beat Virginia Tech already in that underdog role. I just don't know if that defense can hold up at all, though, against Alabama. I just don't see how they can.
Clemson goes to Florida State. They're giving 14.5. I know that's a lot of points on the road, but, God, the Seminoles look absolutely toast, and this is probably a spot where Clemson would love a little vengeance.
Yeah, so this is one actually. You talked about the games this week and how it's hard to have strong opinions. Clemson's going to beat the dog crap out of Florida State. Like, they might beat them 41-7. You're looking at a game here where DJ Uiagalelei is out. The fact that they didn't already bench him tells you everything they need to know about their backup quarterback. He went 0 for 4 against SMU, looked horrible. Clemson, Vegas putting this line out at over 14. They're kind of discouraged. They're trying to discourage people from taking Clemson by putting it out and over that. I think Clemson, and Clemson, Florida State, ACC rivalry. Clemson's going to want to stomp on their grave. I think Clemson rolls here, and I'm taking Clemson in this game.
Another game I really like. I like Tennessee minus the 13.5 at Arkansas. I keep catching myself looking at that number, going, "Why is it so low?" Arkansas is just not a good team. They can't block up front. Tennessee's so good on the defensive front. The only explanation I've got is that maybe Tennessee's going to try to protect Nico a little bit. They get a lead. They might nurse it a little like they did in Norman. But anyway, Tennessee a 13.5-point road favorite.
Tennessee also off a bye here, and Arkansas. The only thing with Arkansas, though, it seems like they fight every week this year.
Yeah.
They make mistakes and they keep shooting themselves in the foot, but they're not that bad. They're not near as bad as I thought they were going to be. Green keeps turning the ball over, but he's mobile. They have a good running game. Arkansas ought to be pretty fired up at home. The line looks a little ratty, too, at 13.5. So I'm probably going to stay. I would lean Tennessee, but I trust Clemson against Florida State a lot more than I trust Tennessee against Arkansas. I just think Arkansas will fight and Florida State will lay down.
Speaking of ratty lines, Michigan getting 2.5 at Washington.
This one's just unreal to me. Washington coming off a road loss to Rutgers on a Friday night. I thought Michigan would be a 3 or 4 point road favorite. The reason they're doing this, Michigan literally can't throw forward passes this year. And so I think that's why that Orji, the quarterback, throws for 80 yards a game. And I kind of I feel like you're supposed to take Washington here if you're like a contrarian gambler. I'm Washington or nothing. This just looks too weird.
Final SEC game, UCF goes to Gainesville. The Knights giving 3 on the road in Gainesville at the Swamp.
I'm friends with SJ Tui. I like Gus Malzahn, but I don't trust Central Florida as far as I can throw them. I hate to say that. I just there's no way I can lay points on the road with the way they play defense. You saw that they came back, had that miracle comeback against TCU. Last week, I was on that. One of the good things, I had Colorado money line last week. I was all over that. I don't think Central Florida's like bad, but their defense I don't know. I just can't trust their defense. Curious to see if Florida goes to Mertz or Lagway. If I'm Florida and I'm Billy Napier, I'm going with DJ Lagway and just hoping he gets hot to save his job at this point.
Any college games I missed that you love?
Kind of think Syracuse UNLV is going to be high scoring Friday night. It's 58.5. UNLV, the backup that's starting after Sluka left is better. And both Syracuse can chunk it with Kyle McCord, that game being in Vegas on a Friday night. Kind of feel like that one could get like a little wild. But yeah, the board this week, it's one of those things where I know that this isn't the best week of games. The Miami at Cal looks kind of trappy. Cal, it's a 9:30 p.m. kick. It's a 10:30 Eastern start for Miami. College game day out there laying 10.5. That one looks a little weird to me. The Virginia Tech at Stanford looks weird. Virginia Tech laying 8.5 at Stanford. Virginia Tech got gutted in that Miami game on that Hail Mary last week. I wonder what kind of effort you see here on a cross-country trip on an early game in sleepy Stanford. It's kind of a letdown spot. And Stanford actually hadn't looked all that bad the last few weeks. I mean, they burned me in that Syracuse game. But yeah, just not a really great week. Iowa State could kill Baylor. They're favored by. Baylor seems like Colorado Hail Mary got them, and then BYU scored their first 4 drives last week, and Iowa State seems like they're pretty good. So I think Iowa State might cover 12 against Baylor. But man, this week, the thing about the gambling, it's like get so trigger happy on Saturday, but it's a long season. And, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to bet 5 or 6 games, but I don't want to burn myself on a Saturday where I don't love everything when we've got so many games for 4 more months.
All right, let's dive into the NFL. We'll go through it pretty quick. Tampa Bay and Atlanta is a Thursday night game. The Bucks a 1.5 point dog in Mercedes-Benz.
I mean, this game's coming down to a field goal because every single Falcons game does. And I'll tell you what, last weekend, I'm 41. I try to not take stuff too personally when my favorite teams lose. I was numb for 90 minutes after the Ole Miss game, and I was numb for 60 minutes after the Saints-Falcons because I just can't stand Atlanta. And I don't know, this game I lean over, if anything, with Mayfield and Cousins on the dome turf. But as far as point spread goes, I just think somebody's kicking a field goal at the end to win this thing. So I got nothing on that.
Vikings red hot. They're giving 2.5 at home to the Jets. They just keep winning. They look really good. Sam Darnold, an early MVP candidate through the first 4 weeks.
So this game's actually a London game at 8:30 Sunday morning,
right.
And so that's why the line's lower. Darnold's going against the Jets too. Obviously, no love lost there. Look, I'm leaning the Vikings, even though it looks obvious. I got burned last week on Green Bay going against them. I remember last week I said I'm going against all 3 3-0 teams. 2 of the 3 covered, Baltimore and Detroit. But I lean Minnesota here. Right? The Jets' offense is struggling. Aaron Rodgers is going under every week on his total. And the Vikings are – I think we need to have a discussion that the Vikings might have the best coaching staff in the NFL with Kevin O'Connell and Flores. I think what Flores is doing with that defense is crazy.
Yeah, they're very good, no question. A team that is not good so far, Cleveland at Washington. Jaden Daniels has been a lot of fun. He and the Commanders giving 3 to Cleveland.
I'm going to keep betting these Commanders overs till it doesn't work. I mean, every game flies over the total. This one's 45. I know Watson's been struggling for Cleveland, but Commanders' secondary is not very good. And Daniels is just so hot right now that you can't go against it. So I'm going to take over 45 in that one.
Baltimore and Cincinnati, huge AFC North game, especially for the Bengals. The Ravens looked phenomenal last week against Buffalo. Now they got to go to Cincinnati. The Bengals got to win. In Charlotte, big spot for Cincy. Cincy getting 2.5 at home.
Instincts are going off to take the Bengals on this. Line looks ratty. Ravens looking so good on Sunday Night Football. Bengals 1-3. Really, if you lose this game, I mean, how are you going to climb out of this hole playoff-wise? The only thing is the Bengals they have a good pass D, and their run defense isn't great, especially after losing DJ Reader, the defensive tackle to Detroit. And you're playing the wrong team if you're not good against the run here with the way Henry's running to Lamar. But I still kind of lean the Bengals in the spot. Line at 2 and rat road favorite, 2.5-point line. And Jamar Chase always cooks against the Ravens too. And Burrow and Chase seems like they've gotten to go in the last couple of weeks. So I'm leaning the Bengals here. I don't love it though.
Another spot that's interesting, Buffalo giving a point at Houston.
I like Houston here, +1. I like them as a home dog, even though it's a slight number. Buffalo, what is it about them that I feel like they play the hardest schedule in the NFL every year? It seems like every single week it's like Baltimore, Houston, KC.
When you win the division year after year, you play hard schedules.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it's tough. But, Houston had a horrible effort in Minnesota last week. I think this is a bounce-back spot. Also, the gambling trend I've followed since I've been 15 years old. When you lose as a road favorite and you're home underdog the next week, you just take it. And it's made me money for like 27 years. So I'm on Houston this week.
Bears have a chance to win again. They give 4 at home to the Panthers. The Bears just struggle so badly on offense, but they keep finding ways to stay in games and ultimately win a couple of games.
I feel like this line's short and you're supposed to take Carolina. I thought it'd be 6. Boy, I tell you what, though, nobody realized how big of an upgrade Bryce Young and Andy Dalton was. Man, totally different team. They've been scoring points, and you can just feel it all over the team because all these guys on the team have to practice with Bryce Young too. And so morale's come up so much since they got Dalton in there. I would lean the Panthers if anything, but man, probably not. I'm not sure I'm going to take them.
The Jaguars continue to struggle. They are at home. They give 3 to the Colts.
For some reason, this is the one I've kind of had started this week. So it looks like Flacco's going for Indy, which is probably better than Richardson, to be honest. But, Neal, there's a weird thing in the NFL. For some reason, some teams that play each other divisions have problems. The Colts have the worst history in Jacksonville ever. Every year they go play this game, they score like 10 points. I don't know what it is about playing down there that gives them so much trouble, but there's a lot of bad history there. And I would lean the Jags, but more than that, I love under 46.5. Probably my biggest play of the whole week.
Okay, interesting. The Dolphins just look terrible. They go to New England. They're a 1-point underdog in Foxborough.
I'm not, this is like just pass, but, New England, if anybody, just because I think New England's like a professional team. But Huntley can't throw. I don't know you got to wonder what Miami's GM was doing not having a backup for Tua. He's only gotten through one season healthy last year, going back to Bama. And you give all that money to Tyreek Hill and Tua, and you don't get some kind of a competent backup? I don't know. I feel like they kind of, I hope the best for Tua, but you really are going to roll the year with Skylar Thompson? That seems very a very, very poor personnel decision.
Agreed completely. All right, Arizona goes to San Francisco, NFC West rivals. The Cardinals getting 7 in Santa Clara.
It seems like the party may be over for Arizona. Last 2 weeks, they've gotten whipped up front by both Detroit and the Commanders. Thought their offense would play a lot better in both games, to be honest. The Niners, too. I'm just Shanahan. And, it seems like now that Debo's back and, Juwan Jennings has been going off and Kittle. I feel like the Niners ought to be fine here in this game. They're just so well coached and so good.
Raiders getting 2.5 on the road at Denver. Big rivalry game here. The Bo Nix and Sean Payton and the Broncos. The Raiders just sort of tread water.
How the heck is Denver 2-2? Man, you win an NFL game last week where you throw for 60. Bo Nix threw 25 passes for 60 yards and they won. How's that even real?
I just think it's Sean Payton, man. Just wins games.
Yeah, I got nothing on this, though. I feel like last year I took the Broncos at home against them and got burned.
Giants, horrible. They go to Seattle. They're getting 6 against the Seahawks.
I think Seattle bounces back here off that Monday night loss. That's a tough, long cross-country trip, and I think the Seahawks are actually pretty good.
The Rams continue to struggle. They're at home this week, getting 3 against the Green Bay Packers.
This one feels like Green Bay might be a rat side just because the coaching thing. LaFleur's McVay's old right-hand guy. So it's always weird when you have that coaching thing going where you have similar schemes and similar game plans. So I actually kind of would lean the Rams, if anything, in this game because of that.
A couple more. You got the Sunday night game. Got the Dallas Cowboys headed to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers. The Cowboys getting 2.5 on the road against the Mike Tomlin's team.
Kind of lean under 43. That seems like a little high here when you look at the Steelers games. I know they played an over last week, but all the rest of their games have gone way under. Dallas has a trend where the games are high scoring in Dallas, but on the road they're not. For some reason, games the last few years, these games in Jerry World always ends up with crazy scores. So I think I'm going to go under 43 here.
And then the last one, the Monday night game, the Saints coming off heartbreaking loss. They go to Kansas City, to play an unbeaten Chiefs team that just continues to sort of survive. They find ways to win. The Chiefs giving 5.5 to New Orleans at home on a Monday night.
I mean, the Chiefs, unbelievable how they just do just enough to win every week. But you're talking about, like, you look at who KC's running out at these skill positions. I mean, they don't have Rasheed Rice, Hollywood Brown, Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, they literally, like, Kelsey looked a little better last week, but he slowed down a lot. Worthy's like a playmaker, but he's not really a good NFL receiver yet. And they don't have anything else. So I actually would lean the Saints in the points, but what I feel like is going to happen, Chiefs are going to do just enough to win by field goal yet again.
Yeah, I do like New Orleans in the 5.5, though.
I do too. Saints still have a lot of injuries, but, it looks like the Saints have lost 2 close ones in a row. The Chiefs keep winning close. I feel like this could be another heartbreaking thing. Very curious to see if the Saints trade for Devontae Adams. A lot of rumors there right now. It would make a lot of sense.
A lot of talk about it. They just don't have a lot of they don't have a lot to give.
No, it would be a second-round pick and then maybe a 4th or 5th. The contract, they could fit it this year, but he makes a ton of money the next 3 years, so they'd have to restructure. But it makes a lot of sense, man. You got a lot of veterans. You got Cam Jordan and Badger and, DeMario Davis and Carr, and, you're 2-2 in the South. So I actually think they should do it because I think Adams, Olave, and Sheed would be really tough.
As always, should be an interesting weekend. I know you're headed down to South Louisiana next week for the LSU game, so we'll figure out how to touch base with one another next week to do this. But hopefully, I'll see you down in South Louisiana in a week.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and mention this too for people going to Baton Rouge next weekend. Huge event Friday night at Ruffino's. It's going to be Todd Graves, founder of Canes, is part of it with Gordy Rush, my old boss. But I love to see some Ole Miss people there too. It's a 6 to 9 deal, like a kind of a pregame party. We'll have really good food, all that kind of stuff. So I'd love to see some Ole Miss people there Friday night. And I'm doing the Ole Miss LSU Saturday night, and then I'm going to Saints Bucks Sunday at noon. I feel like a lot of other Ole Miss fans I've talked to are doing the same thing, doing the doubleheader. And Neal, I was kind of thinking, I don't know if I'm going to do it, but for content, sort of thought about going and just sitting in the LSU student section and just taking it to the face. But I'm worried I'd have a whiskey bottle or 2 at my head.
Yeah.
But it would be really good content.
It'd be funny. That's always my concern, is that it only takes one nut who's just a little too gone and doesn't really understand the social skill of it. And somebody throws
I agree. And I feel like even if I got like something happened, I'd feel like, I'd get like 5 million views if somebody like did something to me. So it would almost be worth it. But clicks game,
I guess
is
so.
what it is.
All right.
Well, sounds good. Well, thank you for having me. Yep. We'll catch up next week. Hopefully the Rebs bounce back here, and and looking forward to seeing people down in Baton Rouge next week.
Talk to you next week, Ben. Thanks. That does it for this edition of MPW Digital Extra, presented by Rustic Revivals Furniture Company. Again, our thanks to all of our guests today: Trey Wallace, Michael Katz, my friend Chris Clark, Ben Mintz. All of those guys gave us plenty of time today on the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, we're brought to you by Rustic Revivals. Check them out of Flowood, Mississippi. RusticRevivalsMS.com. Use the promo code Rebels10 for 10% off of your order. We'll have this to you in podcast form. If you're watching on MPW Digital, we have a lot of programming coming your way, including McCready and Siskey, powered by Rain Total Body Fuel. The Butcher versus the Dance Instructor, presented by LB's Meat Market. Pete's Pigskin Preview, presented by Meadowbrook Wealth Advisors of Raymond James. And then Hand Raised Guys, presented by Comer Heating and Air and Southern Air Conditioning and Heating. Thank you for being with us. Hope you have a great weekend. We will talk to you again soon.